enjoy wearing breeches. Very comfortable, put on my boots, take them off, be seated in the saddle. Never a day out of the saddle, my most pleasant exercise. I've not succumbed to this modern fashion of pantaloons. In fact, I declare a number of the women folk are sporting them here this evening, are they not? You must all be from France. I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. Secondly, I doubt this jocularity is what you've heard spoken with respect to Mr. Jefferson now. No. Certainly not by a Federalist. No. They continue to hurl their heresies against me, suggesting in their tabloids that Mr. Jefferson is likened unto an American sphinx. Have you heard that? Insinuating that I am devoid of humor, reticent, retiring, cerebral, calculating. Already you've seen quite the contrary, have you not? You see what my family and friends, particularly here, my neighbors as well, will tell you. They say Mr. Jefferson's unrestrained in conversation. You never know what he will say, particularly in the company of his neighbors. Lest you think I've rambled into the subject of fashion and style. Now, that is a subject that is wont to occupy us, is it not? Even in the worst of times, we ponder, what will the other be wearing? Should we properly conform? Why won't we conform? Be who you are. Particularly in opinion, particularly when you're free here in this nation. Remember the ancient adage, if everyone is thinking the same thing, then someone is not thinking. Unless you think I've resorted to the humor of fashion and style, well, maybe some of you have read as I have written. In matters of style, simply swim with the current. But in matters of principle, stand like a rock. If there's any message I bring you here this evening, that's a remembrance of those principles over which we shed our blood in the American Revolution. To think that we are now seeing the birth of the second and third generation of those who were born during that time. To wonder how far we've gone, and yet there'll been a change, not as much as many might hope, and to think how far we may go in the next several decades. Imagine that, the 1850s, the 1860s. And I hope we well understand where we will be then depends upon whom? You, not me. I will not live to see it. And I share with you my hopes and my prayers that what we will see, be engaged by you upon those principles written in our Declaration of American Independence. His Excellency President Washington referred to our Declaration as the promise. He referred to our Constitution as its guarantee. You know, as I made my way over here, a good 6 miles, I declare I find I've made good time. It only took me about an hour and a half. So I cannot help but think, as I traveled 120 miles to Williamsburg as a young boy, it still takes me a good 5 days in the saddle to travel 120 miles. Any of you who own a horse who will understand, you never ride more than about 35 or 40 miles a day so as not to tire out your horse, let alone yourselves. You'd never ride any faster in the saddle than about 5 miles an hour. That's a comfortable pace over a long distance. If you tried to ride 6, 7 miles an hour over a long distance, it'll soon prove unsettling to the digestion. And consider most people upon the globe do not even own a fine riding horse. They're expensive to purchase, to breed, to maintain. No, most people upon this globe, even now, they travel one place to the other. How so? Well, your own God-given method of transportation. Your own 2 feet, which will take you comfortably 3 miles an hour. Now, there's something to ponder and care with respect to where we've been, where we are, and where we are going. The average rate of speed upon the globe. Between the minority, those privileged to own a fine riding horse, travel comfortably, 5 miles an hour. Those who have not the privilege, the majority, though, who walk comfortably, a good 3 miles an hour, and there you are. For me, it still remains a 4-mile-an-hour world. That is the world that I live in. I know of no place upon the globe where you can travel any faster than a ship at sea or a horse on land. Now, I know you're thinking, Jefferson, we have made some progress these last several decades. Yes, I know that steam and powered mechanical device, extraordinary. You know, the very first ones engaged upon our continent were engaged almost simultaneously about the year 1788. And do you recall what they placed a steam engine in? What conveyance to allow a more steady propulsion against the vagaries of nature? Do you remember? No. A what?
Boat.
A train? What's that? A boat. A boat. They placed a steam engine in a boat. Here in Upper Virginia, across from Shepherdstown on the Upper Potomac, Mr. James Rumsey of Virginia placed a steam engine in a boat upon the Potomac, while at the same time Mr. John Fitch in Philadelphia placed a steam engine in a boat on the Delaware. Neither of them could make any general advance any faster than one could achieve speed on horseback. A few years after that, a good friend of mine, tobacconist in Philadelphia, Thomas Leeper, contrived an ingenious method. He placed a steam engine in a cart. He placed the cart on two rails parallel, that it might propel itself consistently against the vagaries of nature and terrain. Consistent propulsion. It still could not achieve any greater speed than one could achieve on horseback. I know you're thinking, Jefferson, get modern. We have advanced from there. Well, yes, the only modern advance I know of is the further improvement of the steam engine. That which was engaged by my good friend, my fellow collaborator on our Declaration of American Independence, Robert R. Livingston, who collaborated with our mutual friend, Robert Fulton. They improved the steam engine. They placed it in a boat on the Hudson River to sail the distance between the Port of New York and Albany City, a distance of 150 miles. Citizens, will we ever get over it? It made that distance in 36 hours. Is that not phantasmagorical? I cannot help but wonder what's next. What is right around the corner for us to experience? Imagine such immediacy, such speed. Imagine the improvement in communications. That someone in Albany may know what has occurred in the Port of New York within 36 hours is extraordinary. Where will we be in the next century? The next 2 centuries. Imagine the 21st century, sir. Can you imagine? We will be traveling with such rapidity. Information to be received but in moments of a timepiece. But I say this, citizens, with a caveat. Do you think in the future, perhaps even the near future, we will be traveling so rapidly, information to be received so immediately, that as a consequence, our past will travel equally as rapid behind us? And thereby, we may become the more prone to forget. To forget what happened yesterday? Good heavens, it's so vital to understand where we are today, where we went wrong, what we must not do again, where we must make amends, how we must continue to stay together, e pluribus unum, never to forget. We showed the rest of the world, let alone the British monarchy, who wished to keep us distant and disparate, that we could bring together 13 individual nations. How do we do that? Each one of those former colonies was distant and disparate in the degree of religious opinion in one versus a greater difference in another, in the degree of freeholders in one versus the greater number of tenants living in another, the degree of enslaved in one, overwhelming, but a few in another. We brought that all together, e pluribus unum, and never let us forget that founding principle in which we achieved it. Compromise and resolution on behalf of the common good. You know, as I ride across town, I have the benefit to set my timepieces straight. I've always considered that a town or village is the most civilized when it has a clockmaker. It puts us in mind of this most precious element. Do you hear this, dear?
Yes.
Hear this, sir? Yes, ma'am. Sir, could you imagine there could ever be a time when you might not be able to hear time? To be reminded of it. To continually reflect that once it's gone, I ask you, madam, is there anything you can do to get it back? Do you see how precious an element it is which we are blessed to hold every moment? And therefore we cannot forget where we've been. It's so necessary for these moments now. I was riding across town thinking, will Monroe get here before me? And there was a young boy there, standing on the street as I rode nearby. He was reading a book. I said, "Lad, tell me, what are you reading there?" He said, "Well, it's a book on Cicero." I said, "Truly, his speeches, his jottings?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What amazes you so much about Cicero?" He said, "Well, I will tell you, sir, it is his great regard for history, for he writes therein, a people must never forget their history. That as an individual should never forget his own personal history, that he might not make the same mistakes again. So it is incumbent upon the citizen body." For he writes, thousands of years ago, sir, that if a people forget their history, they will be like school children all their lives, ready to be led rather than to lead. Lead themselves. He then asked me, "Sir, from whence do you travel?" I said, "Well, a little mountain to the southeast of where we are now." He said, "Oh, do you know Mr. Jefferson?" That's one of the great pleasures I enjoy, to write about incognito. Nobody knows who I am. Could you ever imagine if an individual's likeness could be duplicated in the newspapers the same way as words and sentences are? Everybody would know what they look like. They'd never have a moment of solace in their life. So I'm able to discourse with people, friends, or all others who do not have any idea who they're talking with. I can hear their concerns, hear their grievances, and yes, I can hear the number of names they use to describe Thomas Jefferson, and I welcome it. This lad said, "Do you know Mr. Jefferson?" I said, "I'm acquainted with him, yes." And I thought, well now, where is he going to proceed? So I thought I'd thwart him a moment. I said, "Tell me, lad, if you know Jefferson, what do you think he considers to be the greatest ocracy, that greatest ocracy of principle upon which our nation has been founded?" You know how he answered? I share it with you. He said, "Oh, sir, Jefferson? Why, he would have said a hypocrisy." I said, "Well, I beg your pardon, lad." He said, "Well, no, sir. He's the author of our Declaration of American Independence. He is the one who wrote, 'All men are created equal,' and how well we know he is the holder of many hundreds of
Slaves.
Oh, we've been in the same conversation. I said, "Lad, no one knows that better than Mr. Jefferson. That is the world that he was born into. Perhaps your father, perhaps indeed where your family has come from, for it is not only situated here. And rest you assured, no one can accuse Mr. Jefferson of being silent upon this subject, for he knows well if we had been, it would have festered. Festered to where? I should not recount everything that he has worked to achieve in order to open the doors wider towards abolition, and could he indeed free his own people, he could set better the example. But you know, lad, perhaps your father and grandfather know, your relatives, your neighbors in this area, our people are no longer our property. Our economy is so much in arrears, they're the property of our creditors. They are entailed. There are two ways out, other than not, lad. We can sell them, meet the demands of our creditor. That doesn't end it. Or we might be able to try and educate them if we can, or help them to cultivate produce about their cabins. I know Mr. Jefferson has created a nailery at Monticello. The young slave boys there manufacture the nails. They all sell this at market. They make the monies, and if Mr. Jefferson dies insolvent, they may be able to purchase their liberty from their creditors. We aren't certain. We cannot tell. But I tell you one thing. It was not Mr. Jefferson who wrote those statements, those founding principles of our nation. They were written many, many thousands of years before.